Hello, I'm Alex Mulcahy, the publisher of Grid Magazine, and I'm here today at the Henry Got Crops farm with Heidi Barr, the founder of Kitchen Garden Series. Heidi, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's my pleasure.
Let's talk about your business. Let's begin with, first describe what your business is.
So Kitchen Garden Series is a Philadelphia-based lifestyle brand that is working at the intersection of food and fabric. I craft a full line of kitchen textiles that are designed to replace single-use and plastic disposables in homes and restaurants. And I donate a portion of my profits back to this farm and also the East Park Revitalization Alliance, all growing food inside Philadelphia. Historically, people grew their food and their fiber, right? They grew their fabric. There wasn't another way to get it. So it was all part of a small, diversified farm. I take it a step further or a step further back and look at the relationship between food and fabric in terms of food storage and food preparation. So like I make coffee filters and produce bags and bread bags, all designed to store and prepare food. And in my kitchen now, my refrigerator is full of fabric. And if it can't be stored in fabric, it's stored in a container of water. There's no plastic in my refrigerator.
Wow, that is an aspirational place to get to.
It is indeed, and it didn't happen overnight. Mm-hmm. So it took me 3 years. So I finally gave up my dish soap that's in a plastic container, and I'm using a bar dish soap. So that was sort of my final step. So, everybody just chips away at it and takes their time. We can all get there.
So what does sustainable textiles mean? What are the challenges? There are many.
Oh, yes, there are many. So the textile industry is pretty much a classic example of an industry that exploits both human labor and the natural environment on a global scale. And as a rabid environmentalist, I'm working against that and working to change that. I use almost all linen, which is a crop that can be grown in a diversified vegetable crop sustainably and processed without the use of heavy chemicals into fabric. And at the end of its life can be composted. So it's sustainable by definition. And I also craft all of my textiles in Pennsylvania in places that pay living wages and have good working conditions. Mm-hmm. I believe that sustainability is about ideas and it's about a process. And for me, I just kept following my curiosity about things. And each time I bumped up against something that I didn't feel was sustainable or that actually wasn't sustainable, I looked for an alternative. And that's what led me to this grand experiment of growing flax for linen with Emma at Mulcahy Farm out near Pottstown this year. And that project has taken off in ways that we never would have imagined. It's incredible. First of all, flax is beautiful. It's easy to grow. It's very rewarding right up until you have to harvest it, and then it's really hard work. But we're now, this winter, we'll process our first eighth of an acre into spinnable fiber. A woman in Connecticut reached out to me. She's a spinner, and she wants to work with the flax. So I have somebody who's ready to spin it, and hopefully, my joke is that we'll make $1,000 napkin.
Well, that's always the way it is with prototypes.
Right.
That's it. The first one, that's the expensive one. But the proof of concept that a supply chain can be created that does not have exploitation of the environment or people, that's what we're trying to prove.
Right, and it is economical. So flax for linen is a crop that was traditionally grown here in Philadelphia. The Germans brought it with them when they settled Germantown. And in fact, in the Germantown seal, the flax flower is one of the items that appears in their seal. And I'm connected with a group out in Oregon who are 8 years ahead of me on this path. And they are just a handful of investment dollars away from having a Scotch mill up and running that can bring flax from field to spinnable fiber. And then I'm am going to be working with them and some of the growers here to replicate that in the Philadelphia area. So we'll have a mid-Atlantic Scotch mill. I'm optimistic. I say 3 to 5 years, but who knows?
That is amazing. You talk about the intersection of food and textiles. How are they connected?
It's important for something to be sustainable. So diversifying agriculture is a key to mitigating climate change and to having sustainable food systems and fabric systems, right? So flax, which is the plant that is processed into linen, is a 100-day crop. So it can fit into a crop rotation on a diversified farm. It requires little or no chemical inputs, and it requires very little irrigation. So in terms of a textile crop, it's one of the most sustainable plant-based fibers out there. Sustainability is about ideas, right? And so it's about relationships. So a sustainable kitchen for me has grown into this really wonderful thing where I have relationships with the people who produce the food that I eat. Like this farm grows a lot of the food that I eat. I know the people who bake the bread that I buy, etc. So there's that local food system. Most of the pottery I have in my kitchen, I know the people who made that as well, and they're all local businesses, right? I've pretty much gotten rid of plastic. There might be a little bit in there still, but I've tried. I'm getting rid of things that aren't sustainable in terms of the environmental issues. So things that can be composted ultimately, right? And then I've also tried to transition to recipes that use the full vegetable and the full animal that I bring into my house. So I have less waste to begin with. So it's complicated, but honestly, as you move toward it, like it's kind of great to sit down at a table and be like, oh, Nick made this mug and Nina grew these beets and, Allison baked this bread. And it's really great to be able to have that experience and to have relationships in your community. And that's part of what makes it sustainable is your relationships to the people producing the goods you're consuming.
Yeah, it makes the products that you have more meaningful. They have that meaning and those connections, and it's I think a daunting prospect at first because so much has to change. But once you begin to add those things, you are drawn to the beauty, and usually they are beautiful things too. The local food is tastier and more interesting, and as are the things that are made by local artisans.
Right, and local food is actually more nutritionally dense, so you don't get sick as often, right? Like, there's a lot to love about that. It's sustainability in the home is not it's not a buzzword, it's not a trend. It's actually an old way of living that has worked for a long time, and we just got away from it. It's just time to get back.
What are the products that are popular that you're selling?
So my most popular items are consistently the produce storage bags, the coffee filters, and then my crossback aprons, which makes sense. The coffee filters and the produce storage bags are unusual, and they are necessary for people who are looking to replace single-use disposables and plastics in the kitchen. So they're a great first step. And then the crossback aprons are a luxury item. They protect your clothing. So if you're buying local clothes that you paid a lot for, it's nice to have an apron that's really going to protect them. And they're beautiful. So they make great gifts and people love them. I wear mine as a dress in the summer. It's like nothing has just one use.
No. Well, and that actually brings me nicely to the next point I wanted to make, and that is when you started, it was upcycling that you were doing. Talk about the genesis of the napkins.
Right. So the very first product I made were napkins out of the backs of men's button-down shirts that I was getting at a thrift store. And that impulse grew out of a desire to not generate any new material because there are so many textiles that are dumped into one waste stream or another that I just wanted to step into that garbage stream and make something beautiful out of it. As the business grew, what became problematic was what was left after I made the napkins, right? And became more and more of a challenge to use that fabric up. So instead of continuing to bring that into my studio, I shifted to linen because of its sustainability as a textile from crop to end of life. And I still use the remnants from those shirts that I cannot throw away as decoration on my linen napkins, on my market bags, and several other things I make.
Why is it important to buy textiles that are made with natural fibers?
That's a big topic, but buy natural fibers. Do not buy synthetics. Don't buy stretch denim. Any synthetic fabric is a petroleum product, so it requires drilling of oil, it requires heavy chemicals to process. When it's laundered, it sloughs microplastics into the water stream that end up in the food that you eat. And when you discard it at the end of its life, it persists indefinitely in the environment and leaches toxins into the soil, which eventually are going to end up in the food that you eat again. So synthetics didn't even become a big thing in textiles until the 60s and 70s. It's been a very short period of time that we've messed this all up. So we can fix it. We can just go back. Natural fibers, natural plant and animal fibers, so the wools, linen, and others, they can be produced as part of a regenerative carbon capture farming system. So not only do they not damage the environment in being laundered and used and can be composted at the end of their life cycle, but they can actually become part of a solution to climate change because they can be part of a system that is a carbon capture system and can help to sequester carbon back into the soil where we need it.
How would you define a sustainable business? This is, again, another tricky topic. What makes a business model sustainable for you?
That's a really hard one. It's really a struggle as a business person to survive and to stick to my principles. So when you purchase from a business that is truly sustainable, you're going to pay more because that business person is going to be paying their employees at every step of the supply chain a living wage, right? And they're going to be committed to slow growth. Fast growth isn't sustainable. It's just like in nature. Something grows really quickly because it's stressed, it goes to bolt, and it's not useful. It's the same way in business. If a business grows quickly, it's not ultimately sustainable. You have to be committed to slow growth, which means that you have to do without the big, fancy, fast profit, right? So I work really hard for that. I've kept my business as basically home-based. I've outsourced to small businesses my production who are in Pennsylvania and who I can visit and make sure that the people that are working there are treated well. I'm committed to natural fibers, even though they're more expensive, and I don't source anything from a place that doesn't have environmental regulations. So I source all of my linen from Lithuania. It's part of the European Union. It's certified organic, and they have environmental regulations in place that I trust. So that's what makes sustainability, right? It's not necessarily the easiest, fastest path, but it is the most important path, and it's the only one that's going to be left in the end, right?
Yeah. Yeah, we're speeding through things that we are going to use up.
Right, and it's interesting. So I sell a product, but I encourage people to buy less. And that's really true. This year, I've started to consider how I can start to sell information. That's a challenge. I like to give information freely, but some of it is going to have to be behind a paywall if my business is going to survive. So I'm hoping people will find it valuable.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Heidi, for joining me today for this interview.
Thanks. It's been my pleasure. Head to thekitchengardenseries.com to find beautiful, sustainable, practical textiles and help me support 2 organizations who are growing food in Philadelphia ahead of the big food holidays.